I'm going to share with you an article I read not too long ago from a magazine that was describing things about the Adventist church. We as a church, we as an organization. Now, this was not like the Adventist Review. This was not the Recorder that comes out here in the Pacific Union. So this was a non-Seventh-day Adventist magazine. And it was talking about us. So I was fascinated to hear what are others out there saying about us as Adventists. So I read the article. There were a lot of wonderful things, but then there were some statistics that they brought out that I was kind of aware of, but it was sort of a reminder. For example, this one. They said, listen, the Seventh-day Adventist Church as an organization is in more countries around the world than anyone else except Coca-Cola. They're everywhere, but as a church, we are in more countries than anyone else. We are the 5th largest Christian organization. I didn't realize that. Here's one that I did know, and that is that as a Seventh-day Adventist church, we have more schools and more hospitals than any other organization. We have more than, all around the world. We have hospitals, we have schools. But then this one's exciting. It stated, and very accurately, because this is true, I checked it out, that we are growing worldwide as a church by 1 million people a year. That's pretty exciting, isn't it? That our numbers, we are expanding. So you want to talk about the expanding of the kingdom of God, pursuing the mission that God has given to us around the world. When you put all the numbers together, we are growing by at least 1 million new people every single year. Exciting. Now, let me just say, before we start high-fiving each other into a coma over that statistic, maybe I should share with you a rather startling statistic, and it is simply this. Tuesday of this week, this was in the news, that globally now, on Tuesday, the world population hit 8 billion people. That happened just this week. We are now, around the world, there are 8 billion of us on this planet. Now, let me just bring this down into a little bit smaller statistic. That means that every second, 4 babies are being born around the world somewhere. Every single second. Think about that. Every second. 4 babies, 4 babies, 4 babies. When you run the numbers, that means that globally, we grow globally 1 million new people every 5 days. Every 5 days, this planet is growing 1 million. Now, how long does it take for us as a church globally to grow 1 million? It takes us how long? A year. How quickly is this planet growing 1 million? Every 5 days. So this does not take a rocket scientist to figure out the numbers here. This is elementary school math. We as a church globally, obviously we're excited. We're growing 1 million a year, but we're not even keeping up with population growth. Not even close. So let's switch the paradigm for just a moment. 4 babies are born every second. Every second on this planet, 2 people die. Every second. 2, 2, 2, 2. Which means in the next 24 hours, over 170 people will die on this planet in the next 24 hours. So my question is, in the next 24 hours, those 170,000 people who are going to perish, how many of them are going to go into Christless graves in the next 24 hours? You see, the good news can only be good if it gets there in time. Isn't that right? Good news can only be good if it gets there in time. So what are we going to do? Well, I invite you to take your Bibles and open it up to the Gospel of Mark, chapter 8. Mark's Gospel, chapter 8. So while you're finding the 8th chapter of Mark, I got to tell you, there's just some things about the Gospel of Mark that I find so fascinating. So you have all the Gospels again, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But Mark, I think some of the unique things about Mark is, first of all, it's only 16 chapters. So it's not very long. It's just 16 chapters. And Mark just jumps, Mark has this sense of urgency. I mean, he jumps right in with the story of John the Baptist. That's how Mark begins. And there's just this sense of everything. One of his favorite words is the word immediately. I mean, Mark is always saying immediately, immediately, immediately. I mean, it's like, Mark, where are you going? What's the rush? I mean, everything is just moving so fast and so quickly. But the Gospel of Mark is in two parts. You have part 1 and you have part 2. It's divided up into two parts. And what I want to share with you is how part 1 ends, all right? So by now you should have been able to find the Gospel of Mark chapter 8. So there's 16 chapters. We're coming to the middle of Mark, the heartbeat of Mark's Gospel, and it's the end of part 1. And I want you to see what is said here, but I want to give you the context. A parallel passage of this would be Matthew chapter 16. So the disciples and Jesus, they're in this area of Caesarea Philippi. And this is that moment, you remember this, where Jesus asks the question, so who do you say? Well, who do people say that I am? What are you hearing about me? Well, you're John the Baptist, Elijah. Then he peers into the eyes of his closest followers on this planet, and peers into their eyes and their hearts and say, but who do you say that I am? Well, once again, Mark in his brevity doesn't go into the detail like Matthew does, but it's the same question, same experience. And look here in verse 29. So this is Mark's Gospel, chapter 8, verse 29. And Jesus said to them, these would be the disciples, but who do you say that I am? Bless his heart, Peter is always the first one, jumps in. Peter answers and said to him, you are the Christ. Of course, Matthew goes on and says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. But verse 30, so this is the end of part 1 of Mark's Gospel. There's two parts, part 1, part 2. We're in chapter 8. Part 1 ends like this. Then he, Jesus, strictly warned them. So this was not some sort of a casual conversation here. Strictly warned them that they should tell no one about him. Some refer to this as the messianic secret. And you would think, obviously, it's just ingrained in our DNA. You don't keep news like this quiet. This is not, whoa, slow down. Don't say anything about this. You've just acknowledged who I am. Yes, indeed. That is true. I am the Messiah. But please, whatever you do, don't tell anyone. Don't tell a soul. So, part 1 of Mark's Gospel ends in Jesus saying, mum's the word. Don't tell anyone. But now let's go to the end of part 2. So this is the end of Mark's Gospel. Go to chapter 16. This is how it ends. Mark's Gospel, chapter 16. And I want you to see the paradigm shift that happens from the end of part 1 to the end of part 2, because this is a huge, massive paradigm shift in thinking and living and acting from when Jesus said, okay, I am the Messiah, but don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody. And now you come here. Now, of course, you come to the end of the gospel, as with many of them, they're sharing this, what is referred to as the Great Commission. So we don't need to spend a lot of time on that. But in verse 15, I should say, is in essence, we're coming to the end of part 2 of Mark's gospel. And if you read here, and he said to them, to the disciples once again, and the very first word in red letter, so if you have red letter edition, Jesus is speaking, is the word what? Go. Go. Please, you want to talk about a paradigm shift. 8 chapters earlier, Jesus said, well, yeah, I'm the Messiah. Oh, please, don't tell anyone. Don't let that news get out. Then 8 chapters later is the Great Commission and is go, 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 go. And boy, did they go. Those early New Testament believers. That's just when, you're talking about this diaspora, this spreading, the going, the taking of this news of the Messiah. They just went because they had this, we just have to be reminded again, there was just this burning passion of this love for Jesus and this love of news that he's going to come back again, which Jesus is just now telling them. He's going to come back again. And then just this sense of love for the lost. And notice what they were saying. And this goes down to verse 19 and 20. So then after the Lord had spoken to them, he was received up into heaven, sat down at the right hand of God. And so this is the disciples now, the followers, they went out and preached everywhere, the Lord working with them and confirming the word through the accompanying signs. So they went everywhere because they had this passion. They had this passion for Jesus and for the second coming and for the lost. But I also need to remind you that these early New Testament Christians were not the only ones. I happen to be a lover of Adventist history. I just love the stories of Adventist history. So we're talking the James and Ellen White, the Loughboroughs, the Andrews. We're talking about those, the early ones, the formation of who we are today. And what I find fascinating is that when you go back and you study early Adventist history, that the same passions that the New Testament believers had, their love of Jesus, the love of the second coming, love for the lost, is the same for the early Adventist church. Just this burning passion that they had, this love for Jesus, this love for his second coming, this love for the lost, and this desire that, listen, we can't sit on it. We got to get this out somewhere. There was this passion that was just literally burning within them. And so I think about this, and I think about the early New Testament church. I think about we as a church as far as Seventh-day Adventists are concerned, and I think about us today. And I think about Jesus in preparing not just the New Testament church, but preparing our early forefathers and mothers in making sure that this is all being taken literally to the planet. When he said go, literally to the planet. Now, I would suggest to you that there were three things that they took with them. And the first one is they had this passion for the Word. They had this passion for the Bible. And I think about, you remember when Jesus was led into the wilderness of temptation. And it's just one of those experiences. I think Matthew's Gospel, chapter 4, describes it, where Jesus says, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. So there was just this general sense of a passion for the Word of God that the early pioneers had, this passion to take this Word out to the people. There was something that I wanted to say specifically about that, and it was, you remember the story of William Miller, don't you? So William Miller is the one that, when it came to Daniel 8:14, he was the one that discovered that, came to the conclusion that the 2300 days was going to take place in October 22, 1844. But you remember the story of William Miller, don't you? He was a Baptist farmer. That's what he was. He was a farmer. And he had all these questions that people would ask him questions and he didn't have answers for it. So he said, listen, what I'm going to do is every evening, I'm going to just sit down and I'm going to take the Bible, I'm going to start in Genesis, go all the way through Revelation, and I'm going to figure this out for myself and find the answers. So he did. He worked all day as a farmer. Then he had the little oil lamp. You can still go. They still have his house. It's fascinating history, his house. And you can see the little desk, the lamp, and the only tools he had in his toolbox. This is amazing because on your phones right now, you can have multiple commentaries, Bible study notes. Do you know what he had? He had the Bible and Cruden's Concordance. That's it. And he started reading and he started studying. And he's the one that came to the conclusion, hey, listen, October 22, 1844, it's over. Jesus is coming. Get ready. This is the part that I find fascinating about William Miller. This is the testimony that he gave when it was all over. In fact, after October 22 came, Jesus didn't come. He still had this testimony in which he said, the scriptures became my delight, and in Jesus I have found a friend. Isn't that beautiful? The Scriptures became my delight, and in Jesus I have found a friend. And I think about that, and I think about the early pioneers. I think about the choices that they made in how they chose to live their lives, and how they were a people of the book, how they were people of the word. And I think about us today. Here we are, these generations later. Are we still the same people? Do we still have these same burning passions? A love for God, a love for His word, a love for the second coming. So I want to give you a little Christmas challenge here right now. So we're going to push the pause button for just a moment. Christmas is coming up. Not that I should have to remind you, okay? Christmas is just around the corner. So I want you to do something a little unusual, though, this Christmas, because Christmas is always about getting gifts for someone else, right? So I want you to go out and buy a gift for yourself. And this is simply it. I want you to go out and buy yourself a brand new Bible. And I want you to wrap that Bible. And I want you to put it on the Christmas tree. And on Christmas morning, open it up and act surprised. Who gave me this? This is awesome. Thank you for whoever it was. Thank you for giving me this. Thank you for giving me this Bible. And then here's what I want you to do. I want you to take that Bible and follow a very simple plan and read the Bible all the way through. Now, I realize that probably I would like to believe everybody in here has read the Bible systematically all the way through. But how in the world can we ever say that we are people of a book that we've never read completely? So why not make the year 2023 the year that we read all the way through the Bible? And I'm going to share with you a simple plan. Because when I first started doing this, there was no plans out there. You had to just figure it out yourself. And this is what I've discovered. And I've discovered that if every single day, and this is the key, if every single day you read 2 chapters from the Old Testament, 1 chapter from the New, and a psalm, see, this is the way you do it, that you get a little bit of variety. Then, if you do that consistently every single day, at the end of 2023, I promise you, you will have journeyed all the way through the Scriptures. Go to the Word. Go to the Word all the way through Scriptures. You know what the challenge is for us in our culture today? So we always make these New Year's resolutions, and one of them is, this is the year I'm going to read the Bible all the way through. I'm going to do it. I realize, listen, how can I say I'm a person of the book that I've never read all the way through? That doesn't make a lot of sense. So this is the year I'm going to start in Genesis, and I'm going to read through. So January 1, you start reading Genesis. Oh, the stories in Genesis are terrific. There's all kinds of action and activity and exciting things that are taking place. And then you get into Exodus, and the first few chapters in Exodus are pretty good. And then they start wandering, and things start slowing down. And after a few weeks of reading through it, this idea is just not working out. And then the next year rolls around, January. Oh, man, this is the year. This is it. I'm going to read I need to read the Bible through. I'm going to start in Genesis. I'm going to read all the way through. And the stories in Genesis are exciting. You get to Exodus, well, not so exciting. And listen, I've come to the conclusion that as Seventh-day Adventists, we are scholars when it comes to Genesis and half of Exodus. That's pretty much it. But you see, you need a plan. That's the thing. You need a plan because there's parts of the Old Testament that, have you read Leviticus lately? Yeah, have you read Numbers? Have you been there for a while? But there's a reason why it's in the Bible. So this is what you do. This is a very simple plan. And you can do it. Make 2023 the year, because I'm going to give you this plan. I have shared this plan literally around the world, and I know it works. Get yourself a brand new Bible, one that's not marked up yet, and every single day, read 2 chapters from the New, 2 chapters from the Old, 1 chapter from the New, and a psalm. And I promise you, in 1 year, you will have read through the Bible. And the beauty of that is that when you do get to Leviticus and Numbers, you're always going to have New Testament, and you're always going to have a psalm. So you're going to get something every single day. I promise you, something good is going to happen. Let me tell you a story just to help illustrate this, a story about an evangelist. I'd gone to a huge, we're talking about an urban city. This was a massive city, and started doing an evangelistic series. Well, those who have done an evangelism, you know that you've got to put little stuff out there to keep attracting people to come back. So he said, hey, listen, tomorrow. He said, so everybody that comes tomorrow, even if it's the first time, invite a friend and a neighbor, they come, they're going to get this gift. Because at the end of the meeting tomorrow night, I'm going to personally place into your hand a pocket New Testament. Beautiful, brand new. Pocket New Testament. Just all you got to do is just show up. That's it. I mean, just come, bring a friend, bring a family member. I'm going to hand it out. So he preached. He's standing at the door. He's got a couple of boxes here, and man, he's giving them out. Boom, boom, boom. Everybody walks by. They know what to do. They hold out the hand. He puts in a Bible. And then the moment comes that someone walks up, and he puts the Bible in their hand. But, normally when you receive something, you pull it back. I mean, it's yours, so you take it back. But they didn't. Now you got two people. You got the evangelist and this other person. They're both holding on to the Bible at the same time. And the evangelist looks into this young man's eyes and says, well, don't you want the Bible? And the young man says, yes, I do, but he says, I feel compelled to inform you what I'm going to do with this Bible if you give it to me. Well, the evangelist is fascinated. He goes, so what's your plan? I want to give you this little Bible. It's for free. You're here. But so what are you going to do with it? And the young man says, well, if you give me this Bible, he says, I'm going to take this Bible and I'm going to tear out a page at a time, put my tobacco in it, roll it up, and I'm going to smoke it. Is that okay with you? The evangelist was quick on his feet. So the evangelist peers into the eyes of this young man, and he says, okay, here's the deal. If you promise me that you will read the page first, the front page and the back page, that one page, before you tear it out, put your tobacco in, roll it up, and smoke it, if you will promise me that, I'll give you the Bible. And the young man said, I'll do it. Gave him the Bible, and he disappeared. Well, so a few years go by. And again, he's a well-known evangelist speaker. He's at this huge conference setting, and he's one of the preliminary speakers, and he gives his talk. And afterwards, all the people, there's just crowds around. He's shaking hands, greeting people. And when things finally calmed down a little bit, a young man came up and shook his hand, and he said, looked at the evangelist and said, do you remember me? Well, for those of us that do public speaking, that's kind of a trick question because you don't dare say yes, and then if they don't identify where you actually knew them from, you're stuck. I mean, there's no easy way out. And then if you say no, and you should know them, well, that's a little awkward there. But he was a very seasoned evangelist. He said, you look familiar, but maybe just tell me a little bit more about yourself. So he did. The young man did. He said, so do you remember when you did this series of meetings in this city? Oh, yeah, I remember that. And do you remember the night that you were giving out New Testament pocket Bible? Oh, yeah, I remember that. And do you remember that there was a guy that came up and said, hey, if you give me this Bible, I'm going to smoke it? Yeah, I remember that. That doesn't happen everywhere I go. And the guy said, that's me. You gave that Bible to me. And the evangelist was fascinated. He said, well, so what happened? Tell me your story. He said, so I did exactly as I promised. I took that pocket New Testament home, and I would read a page, and then I would tear out that page. I put my tobacco in it. I rolled it up. I smoked it. It was wonderful. And the evangelist said, well, so what happened next? And the guy said, well, he said, I smoked my way through Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And he said, I was happily puffing my way through John when I came to John 3:16. He said, and I read that, and I read it. This verse that talked about the love of God for me, giving his only son. And he said, there was this conviction in my heart. And he said, I literally at that moment, I got on my knees, I gave my heart to God, and I'm now studying to become a pastor today. Can you believe that? And yet, you and I have access to this 24/7. We have this book. It's called the Bible, straight from God himself. So listen, my friends, if for whatever reason you have not journeyed all the way through this book systematically, 2023, this is the year. There is power in this book that is like no other. It changes people's lives. It transfers people's lives. It empowers people's lives. And we have access to multiple copies and translations. This is the year. Buy yourself. And the reason why I'm saying is buy a new Bible. If you pull out a Bible that you've read before and it's already underlined, your eyes automatically go straight to what was underlined. Well, what was there? Why did I underline it? Buy yourself a brand new Bible. Wrap it up, put it on the tree, open it up, start a journey with Jesus, and I promise you, if you follow this 2-1-1 plan, a year from now, you will have journeyed all the way through Scriptures with Jesus. All the way through. So how do we do it? All right? So we go to the Word. That's the first thing that we do. We go to the Word. Secondly, I would suggest to you that then we go to prayer. We go to prayer. Look, I think all of us understand this. This is not rocket science here, the importance of Bible study and prayer. But I tell you what, there's just something about this element of prayer, this connection with God that literally just changes lives. Literally changes lives. So my dad was, I'm just going to share this quick story. I'm looking at this clock, just trying to stay on time. So my dad, for a number of years, was president of ADRA. Have you ever heard of ADRA, the Adventist Development and Relief Agency? So he did that for, I think, almost like 18 years. Traveled the world. ADRA's in, I think it's like 160, 170 countries now. It's worldwide. By the way, you know ADRA's ours. It's ours. It's the Adventist Church. Adventist Development and Relief Agency. So for the last number of years, Dad's been retired, but boy, you can't keep that guy. You just can't keep this guy down. He's always on the go. And so we started traveling together, doing ADRA-like projects, networking with local countries, and trying to find ways that you can make a difference for the people living in that country. So we went to Vietnam, for example, just a few years ago. So we were in Ho Chi Minh City. This is Saigon. This is southern Vietnam. Those of you that lived through the Vietnam War, you know all about Vietnam. So we went there working with the local mission office, doing some mission projects. How can we align with ADRA in Vietnam and do projects? So it's like putting in fresh wells, building clinics for remote villages, these sort of things. But I told Dad, I said, look, Dad, so if we're going to go to Vietnam, if I'm going to travel all that way with you, I want to go north. I want to go into North Vietnam because when I turned 18, the Vietnam War ended. I literally went in to register, and then I was told, listen, the war's wrapping up, Vietnam, don't have to register, it's over. That was a huge sense of relief because we were living in Singapore as missionaries at that time. Part of the territory that my dad had as president of the union over there was Vietnam, so he was in and out of Vietnam all the time. So I said, Dad, North Vietnam is open. Let's go up. I want to go to Hanoi. I want to see what's going on up there, what kind of work we have going on up there. So we did. So once we finished everything in Saigon, down in the south, we made our way up to Hanoi, and we were with the Vietnam Union president. He said, listen, we just started the work here in North Vietnam. They literally, the communists, because it's a communist country, they just opened it up for Seventh-day Adventists can come in and start living among the people. And so we said, well, listen, we want to see, there was no church, but what they had done is so everything's in high rises in these southern Asia countries. So they had rented a tiny little apartment on like about the 5th floor of this building, and there is where the pastor that they had sent and his wife and 2 little daughters were living. Now, Dad and I went to Vietnam in the summer. Don't ever do that. Asia in the summer. You can say it gets hot here in California. Okay, it gets hot, 100 degrees. But it's not 100% humidity on top of 100 degrees. You can hardly breathe. It's just that humidity. It's just so intense. So we said, listen, we want to see, let's go up there. Let's just see what little work is going on in North Vietnam. What's happening there now that it's opened up? So we did, the mission president, and I'll never forget, we drove down this little alley. There's no church, obviously. They're just starting here. Down this little alley, this tall, high-rise building. He said, okay, the family's on the 5th floor. They're in 2 little rooms, and then there's a larger room that they use for a worship place, like a sanctuary, like here. And so we pulled up in front. I remember we got out of the van. Well, the van was nice and air-conditioned. We stepped out, it's like, whoo, like a furnace, just so hot. And we start making our way up these stairs, back and forth. And the higher we went, the hotter it got. Up and up and up, finally to that top floor. And as soon as you reach the top landing area, that was their kitchen. They had no actual kitchen room is just the landing area. 2 little bedrooms and a larger room that was the sanctuary. And we met the pastor and his wife. Met his wife, 2 little kids, and I reached out to shake the hand of the pastor and discovered he was blind. He was blind. And see, at this time, I was president of the Hawaii Conference, and I'm just thinking to myself as a president, if I was going to send a family to a dark county on one of the islands of Hawaii to start a work from scratch, would I be sending a blind pastor to an area that they don't even know or never been to? Blind pastor. So we met him. And we sat down and started talking with him. And so you just ask, so what's your story? I mean, what happened? What got you here? So he said, listen, I was in university. I had great plans. He said, I was going to be an architect. I was going to be a builder because Vietnam was recovering and there was a lot of building going on. So he said, I wanted to build. But somewhere along the way, I gave my heart to Christ. And he said, I had this intense desire to be a pastor. I just wanted to be a pastor. But he said, I was dating somebody that was not a Christian, didn't want to have anything to do with it. So he said, I worked up my courage because we were pretty serious. I worked up my courage and broke off the engagement. And he said, she didn't take it very well. She was quite angry, very, very angry. A few days went by, and he said, she contacted me and asked, can we get together? There's just something I want to tell you. And he thought, okay, I need to at least do that, maybe for some closure for here. So they get together. To make a long story short, in her anger, she threw acid into his face, which is not really that uncommon. It's uncommon in our culture, but back then, it doesn't happen very often, but it can happen. Threw acid in his face, and I looked closer and I realized, man, he does have scars. I mean, I hadn't peered that closely, but I took another look. He's got scars on his face. And he said, the worst part of it all, he said, I know that my scars eventually can heal, but he said, I lost my eyesight over that. And then I lost my dream. I had this dream of becoming a pastor. I said, well, there's no way I can be a pastor. Now I'm blind. How is that going to ever happen? He said, I went through depression, despondency. And then somebody said, well, listen, man. They said, they've got Bibles now that are in Braille. I said, what a concept. So he said, I learned it. And he said, I started studying. He said, I went through school, became a pastor, fell in love with this person, and now the Vietnam mission has sent me here to Hanoi to start a brand new work. And we didn't say it out loud, but we're thinking, but you're blind. You're blind. How do you go to because Hanoi is a huge city. Just go to any Asia city. It's just, people everywhere. How do you do it? And then we asked him a question, well, so can we see your Bible? We want to see your Bible. And I tell you, as I share this here with you, this is being replayed in my mind. So he sends one of his little daughters into just a tiny little room, and she comes out with the Bible, and he holds out his hands as if he is receiving the greatest treasure this planet has ever been able to give. His hands are just, and that Bible is placed, and he just opens at that Bible, and very gently his fingers begin to feel the Braille Bible. And we said, well, so how in the world do you come to a communist part of Saigon? All of Saigon is communist, but he said, you're coming up here, there's not an Adventist in sight, and how in the world do you get started? He said, well, first of all, I just memorize everything. And then he said, the way we get started is that I started going to the Sunday churches. So he said, we started on Sundays. I would memorize the Bible studies, and then we would go to these Sunday churches. And we said, well, how do you get there? Well, on the motorcycle. Everybody has motorcycles in Vietnam. Everybody. I said, well, you drove? No, he started lying. I said, I didn't drive. My wife drove. But then she said, it's so uncanny. He's sitting on the back of the motorcycle and saying, you missed this turn. And she said, well, how do you know that? You're blind. You missed this turn. Just this sense. He says, I would go into these Sunday churches, and he said, I just start talking about the Bible Sabbath. I said, well, so what did they do? He said, they got angry and threw me out. Sunday churches just get angry. They just throw me out. So I'd go back home to this little apartment, and we would just pray and pray and pray. And the next Sunday, get on the back of the little scooter, go to another Sunday church. And then I just start talking to the people about, there's a Bible Sabbath, and it's not today. Let me tell you about the Bible Sabbath. The pastor would hear about it, get angry, throw them out. And do you realize how he said, they would call the police on me. And the police would eventually come, they would throw me out, and the police would come and arrest me and take me, and then they would interrogate me. So what do you believe? Why are you saying this? What are these rumors? On and on and on. He said they were very, very rough with me, throw me in a cell. But he said, I was just determined in my heart, treat them like Jesus would treat them. How would Jesus? So I was very kind. I was very considerate. I never raised my voice. I answered all their questions. And he said, it happened 18 times. I'm going to these Sunday churches, and then they throw me out, and they call the police, and then I get arrested, and I get in, I'm taken to the police station and interrogated. But I begin to notice that it was always the same policeman that arrested me. And he said over time, this policeman started gaining ranks in the police department. He'd go higher and higher and higher very rapidly. And he eventually became the chief of police. And he said it got to the point after 18 times we had this personal relationship. I go to a Sunday church, they call the cops, and they said, oh, no, we know that guy. Just leave him alone. Just leave him alone. And slowly but surely, one person, then another person. By the time we were there, there's like 5 people. 5 humble people gathering that 5th floor of a very hot, non-air-conditioned North Vietnam. Nothing like this. I hope none of you come to church complain, oh, it's a little hot. Oh, it's a little cool in here. Go to Vietnam, my friends. Check out Hanoi sometime. You'll come back with a brand new appreciation for what you have here. You go to the Word, you go to prayer, and finally, you go to the lost. That's what we do. Seventh-day Adventists, we go to the lost. How do we reach these people? We go to the lost. That's the way that it happens. That's the way that the church grows. Because we got the Word in our hearts, we spent time on our knees, and God has inspired and equipped us to go and to share. That's how it's going to go. Because the day's going to come, it's going to need to be more than 1 million a year, but the day's going to come. It is going to come. I just want to share with you another story about the early New Testament church. I love this story. It's a story about in the early beginning. So it was we had finally just come up with the name Seventh-day Adventists. So we had the leaders, the James and Ellen White, the Loughboroughs, the Smiths and whatnot. And the word went out through the evangelism community, hey, listen, we're gonna network together to take the gospel to the world. And they invited the Adventists, a couple of the Adventist leaders. So they all gathered together in a room, leaders from all the different denominations, and they put a map up of the world up there. They put a map up and said, okay, let's just divide this place up. Presbyterians, what do you want? Okay, we'll take this section. Methodists, we'll take this section over here. Baptists, okay, we'll take this section. And when everything was all divided up by all the other religious organizations, they turned to the Adventists, and they said, you're such a little group here. Yeah, you're just very, very small in numbers. Is there anything up there that you think that you could handle? And the Adventists looked at each other, and they looked at these leaders, and they said, yeah, we'll take the whole thing. We're going to take the entire thing. Because our hearts are convicted and convinced that this good news literally needs to be taken to the far ends of the earth. And as Seventh-day Adventists, we have. I'm a product of that. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist missionary kid, several generations. And this gospel of the kingdom is being proclaimed around the world. So exciting to be a Seventh-day Adventist Christian today. But I leave you with this story because I realize it's wrap-up time here. I leave you with this story. So this is a story that took place during Iraq. You remember those days. The war was about ready to end. There was a pilot by the name of Robbie. He was a pilot, and he was called in at the end of one day, a couple of with his other buddies, and he was listening. Hey, listen, the war's almost over, and you guys are getting shipped home immediately. I mean immediately. We're not talking about a couple of days. You're going back right now. So they gathered up, their stuff, got onto the plane, and were flying. And of course, he's getting all excited, Robbie, because he's thinking, you know what? I'm going to land and I'm going to call my family and let them know I'm coming home. But as he's sitting on the plane, he's thinking, it'd be kind of fun to surprise them. They have no idea. I mean, I just found out about this a few hours ago. I think I'm going to surprise them. And so they land and they get into a car and so they're going to drop each other off. And his is the first place, his town that he lives, Robbie's town. So they're driving early morning hours, and he's getting all excited about how the family's going to react, his wife and his 2 young kids, when he walks into the door and what kind of a reception he's going to have. He's all excited. Finally, as the sun is coming up, they're arriving in his town, and now he's starting to recognize the familiar streets and corners of his hometown. And then they pull up in front of his house. I mean, I tell you, dude, his shock, he couldn't believe it. There was this huge banner on the garage door, and it said, "Welcome home, Daddy." That's what it said, "Welcome home, Daddy." And he's saying to himself, how do they know? How did they know? I didn't even know until just a few hours. How did they know? So let me read to you what happens next here from his own words. He writes and says, "When I walked into the house, the kids, about half dressed for school, screamed, 'Daddy, Daddy.' Susan, my wife, came running down the hall. Oh boy, she looked terrific. Hair fixed up, makeup on, crisp yellow dress. 'How did you know?' I asked. 'How did you know?' 'Oh, I didn't,' she said through her tears of joy. 'I didn't. But once we knew the war was almost over, we knew that you'd be coming back. We knew you'd try to surprise us. So we decided to be ready every single day.'" We decided to be ready every single day. It occurs to me as I stand here and look into your faces, I only know a few of you. I don't know what's going on in your life. I don't know what's going on in your world right now. But I do know this. Something's going to happen very soon. And Jesus is coming back very, very soon. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to look at the tea leaves of this world today, just the headlines of every single day, and this planet is gasping its last breath. So the question is then, how do we choose to live? Today, today, today. The war is almost over. He's coming back. What do you say we live today and each day in the eager anticipation of the soon second coming of Jesus Christ?